Auctioneer Jaxon, a neutral legendary. 2 mana 2/3, whenever you trade, discover a card from your deck to draw instead. So this goes with the new Tradeable keyword. Some cards have Tradeable, and you can, for 1 mana, shuffle them into your deck to draw a new card. So with this, instead of drawing a random card from your deck, you get to choose one from a set of 3. Basically, it turns your Tradables into tracking. So I think like tracking is obviously a good card. Hunter plays it a lot. A lot of non-hunter classes would play it given the opportunity. But I don't think it's really worth I don't think it's enough of an upgrade over just drawing a card that you want to invest a 2 mana 2/3 into it as well. I mean, maybe if you're playing a deck that plays a ton of tradable cards, then you can use Auctioneer Jaxon and trade like 3 times in the same turn. And like at that point, then maybe the effect starts to look worth it. But they haven't shown like a ton of tradable cards so far. And I think you'd need to play a lot to justify this, because on its own, it's just a 2 mana 2/3, and I just don't think there's a significant enough difference between drawing a card from your deck and discovering a card. Like in general, discover is better than add a random card to your hand, because cards that aren't in your deck suck. But when you're drawing a card from your deck, you expect that card to probably be pretty good, right? So I just don't think this is worth it for an effect, unless your deck just already has a ton of tradable cards, and then in that case, there's not really that much reason to not include it. Persistent Peddler, this is for Demon Hunter. 4 mana 4/3 with Tradeable, and Death Rattle, summon a Persistent Peddler from your deck. So assuming the other copy is in your deck, it's a 4 mana 4/3 with Death Rattle, summon a 4/3. So a really good piloted shredder, basically. And because this has Tradeable, it's actually very consistent that the other copy is going to be in your deck, because if you draw both, you just trade one and then play this, and then you get your good piloted shredder. So this does seem pretty powerful. Piloted shredder I don't think would be like an insane card by today's standards, but it's probably worth playing, and particularly in Death Rattle Demon Hunter, where this also has synergy with the 3 mana 3/3 that summons up to a 4-cost Death Rattle from your hand. Has all kinds of other Death Rattle synergies. Seems like this just slots into that deck pretty easily. Outside of that deck, I don't know that it's really going to be quite worth it. But, I mean, Tradeable is still a really strong keyword. It's still a piloted shredder if you need it. I guess it probably is good enough outside of Death Rattle Demon Hunter. It's just a high roll shredder that can also be traded. Seems like a good card. Next up we have Garrote, or Rogue. 2 mana, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. Shuffle 3 bleeds into your deck that deal 2 more when drawn. It's a little bit weird to me that you shuffle the bleeds into your own deck. Doesn't it just make more sense that they would be in your opponent's deck because they're the one bleeding? I don't know, whatever. But it still seems like a pretty good card. If you assume that you hit all 3 bleeds, this is 2 mana, deal 8 damage, which is obviously just a ton. But you do have to actually draw them, so it's not like super consistent. But it turns out that Rogue is actually just good at drawing their entire deck. With, Field Contact in particular. They also have like the stealth stuff that draws a card. Their weapon draws a card with Silverleaf Poison. There's a Cutting class. And even Secret Passage. This card does have like a bit of anti-synergy with Secret Passage, because the things you hit off Secret Passage are not considered drawn, so the bleeds won't cast themselves. But even in that case, the bleed is still just 1 mana, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. Like, it's not as good as Sinister Strike, but it's still just more damage for your damage Rogue. And that was something that Rogue was like kind of lacking outside of their weapon damage. But now between 2 Garrote, 2 Wicked Stab, 2 Sinister Strike, it feels like that deck just has like enough damage to win the game now. So yeah, I mean, I think this is just a pretty good card. It's 2 mana, deal 8 in a class that I think actually can draw the whole deck pretty consistently. It also has like some synergies with Malevolent Strike, the one that is Assassinate but costs less for cards that were shuffled into your deck. I don't know if that's going to be relevant, but I think it's just a good card on its own. Next we have Imported Tarantula for Hunter. 5 mana, 4/5 with Tradeable. And Death Rattle, summon 2 1/1 spiders with Poisonous and Rush. So it's got Tradeable, that's really good so far. 5 mana, 4/5 Death Rattle, so it does compete a bit with Teacher's Pet, which is very similar, but it does have Taunt. So I think that's going to depend, like depending on the meta, you might want the Taunt over the like removal effect of these spiders. But the Death Rattle on this card is very powerful. 2 1/1 spiders with Poisonous and Rush. Now, as a Death Rattle, it does seem like it's probably going to be dying on your opponent's turn more often than it will be dying on yours. And in that case, the Rush on the spiders doesn't really matter too much, and they're just 1/1, so they can get like hero powered down. But it does still force your opponent to deal with the spiders at least, because if they just ignore them, they can't really develop into this, right? So, like, if they're forced to spend 2 mana on a Druid hero power, that's, like, pretty good for you, I would say. And there are also some ways to, like, trade this off on your turn. Maybe, like, this card is really, really good with Guardian Animals, because you just give it Rush and trade it off. Good with Animated Broomstick as well. Trade off your big spider, and then you have the 2 Poison Rushers to deal with other minions. And, of course, it's good with Jewel of N'Zoth. That's, like, the main place where it will compete with the Teacher's Pet in a Jewel of N'Zoth Hunter deck. I think generally Death Rattle Hunter is like trying to survive for turn 8, so Teacher's Pet looks a little bit more appealing. But if you're trying to play that deck and there's not too much aggro, then I could definitely see the Imported Tarantula being a little bit better. It's also a beast, so it has all those kinds of synergies in Hunter, particularly Warsong Wrangler I think is going to be the most important of those. And at the end of the day, it's just like a playable card that has Tradeable slapped onto it, and Tradable's really good, so seems like a good card. Next we have the Shaman Questline, Command the Elements. 1 mana, the questline is play 3 cards with Overload, your reward is unlock your overloaded mana crystals. Then there's play 3 cards with Overload, summon a 3/3 with Taunt. And finally, play 2 cards with Overload to get Stormcaller Bru'kan. Stormcaller Bru'kan is a 5 mana 7/7 with Battlecry. For the rest of the game, your spells cast twice. So your spells casting twice is a very powerful effect. This means that you can Lightning Bolt your opponent for 6 instead of 3, or Serpent Shrine Portal them for 6 instead of 3. Or you can also Rockbiter Weapon yourself twice when you have Doomhammer. So you can actually just equip Doomhammer and then play like 2 Rockbiters. I guess you can just like double Rockbiter, double Stormstrike, and then you give your hero plus like, what even is that? Plus 24. So yeah, pretty insane finishing potential with this card. I think the hardest part of this questline though might just be finding enough Overload cards to play with it. Because it is play 3 Overload cards, not Overload for 3. So like Lightning Bloom only counts as 1 card. And there really just aren't like a ton of playable Overload cards for Shaman. There's like Lightning Bloom, Guidance, Lightning Bolt, Novice Zapper, I guess, and then you have like Perpetual Flame and Feral Spirit. Serpent Shrine Portal's good too. But like even if you max out on all those, you're still only playing like what, 12 or maybe 14 Overload cards, and you need to play 8 of them just to finish this quest. And the thing is, among those Overload cards are like Lightning Bolt and Serpent Shrine Portal, which are the ones that you most want to be abusing with Stormcaller Bru'kan. So like, by the time you really play this card, how much benefit are you getting off of it? I guess at that point you're like pretty committed to the Doomhammer line with Rockbiters. But like, if that's your deck, do you really need Stormcaller Bru'kan for the finishing potential? It doesn't really seem like it. And we did see the 2 mana 1/4 Shaman legendary, which might end up just being a better finisher. They have infinite damage in the late game with the Lightning Bloom Yashiraj Circus Medic thing. So like, it seems like if you're playing like a Doomhammer deck, you kind of just win the game before Bru'kan is relevant. And if you're playing a slower Shaman deck that wants finishing potential, then maybe you just go for the Yashiraj line. So this side quest or this quest line rather, just seems a little bit awkward to me. I do wonder though, like maybe this is just like kind of good in a Doomhammer deck because the early rewards are just like pretty good on their own. The first one is just unlock your overloaded mana crystals. If you can set that up properly, this can be just like a thing you play on turn 1, and then later in the game it can just give you like 3 or 4 mana. That's pretty good. Like if you happen to line up, I don't know, a Serpent Shrine Portal and a Lightning Bloom and something else all in the same turn, then yeah, this card can just give you a bunch of mana, which is nice. And the second reward is summon a 3/3 elemental with taunt. Like, that's pretty fine. And you may or may not even get that taunt at a relevant time, but some games you will, and then there'll be like 10% of the games maybe Stormcaller Bru'kan is relevant. And of course, there's also a huge incentive to be playing Overload and Shaman going forward because of Overdraft, the thing that does damage equal to your overloaded mana crystals. So maybe this card just like fits in that deck. It doesn't necessarily have to hit Bru'kan every game to be good, but sometimes it does, and you win games that you otherwise wouldn't. This will be an interesting card to keep an eye on for sure. Next we have the Druid questline, Lost in the Park. So the questline is gain 4 attack with your hero. The reward is 5 armor. And then you need to gain 5 attack with your hero. You get 5 more armor and draw a card. And then finally you need to gain 6 attack with your hero. Your reward is Guff the Tough. Great name. And Guff the Tough is a 5 mana 8/8 beast with taunt. And Battlecry, give your hero +8 attack this turn, gain 8 armor. So if you manage to finish the quest line, you get, what? You get 18 armor, 8 damage, and you draw a card. And you get a 5 mana 8/8 taunt. Like, that's pretty good payoff for finishing the quest. But how easy is it to actually finish? You need to gain 15 attack. And the way the attack is, it has to be like 4, then 5, then 6. There's no like overlap. If you like hero power twice and then gain 4 attack, that still only completes the first part of the quest line. So it is pretty difficult to actually finish the quest line, I would say. But Druid does have several relatively powerful cards that can help us out with this. We saw the Park Panther recently, which is a 4 mana 4/4 beast with rush, and when it attacks, it gives your hero +3 attack that turn. So you just like play this on 1, hero power on turn 2, and then the Park Panther will finish the quest for you, or finish that part of the quest for you. We've also got Moon-Touched Amulet, which can give your hero +4 attack, and Moon-Touched Amulet is just a good card. Like, it's seen play in Standard before. It's particularly good in like Yashiraj decks because it does have Corrupt. We also have Feral Rage, which is like mostly pretty outclassed by Moon-Touched Amulet, but it is an option. And then finally we have Pounce, so just 0 mana for 2 quest progress is pretty nice. It does seem like with all of those, we probably can eventually complete the quest. But really it's just a matter of, is it worth including those cards in your deck? If you're playing Park Panther, you have to give some serious consideration to your Guardian Animals package. Pounce is like kind of a mediocre card, especially depending on the meta. Moon-Touched Amulet is fine, but it's still a relatively small pool of cards that's helping you finish the quest. Sometimes you're not going to finish it for a really long time, and if it takes a long time to finish, like, how much do you care about all this armor payoff that you're getting? And if you're spending the whole time, like, gaining armor, how impactful is it really that Guff the Tough gives you +8 attack? I mean, I guess you can use it as removal, which is nice. But generally, if I'm giving my hero +8 attack, I want to hit the opponent for 8. So it seems a bit weird that up to this point you're just gaining armor, and then you're like gaining damage, also gaining armor, but gaining damage as well. But maybe the armor gain is really just to offset the damage you're taking when you're using your hero to attack with Pounce. But it still seems a little bit underwhelming to me. There's also the fact that the quest lines start in your opening hand, so that's 1 less card for you to mulligan for Overgrowth. And Druids do tend to live or die by the number of Overgrowths they draw in a game. So I think out of all the quest lines, this is the one that I'm probably least excited about. But this could be like a Malfurion the Pestilent situation. where it's not the flashiest of the quest lines, but it does give you a lot of armor. It gives you a big taunt at the end, so it can just give you some staying power while you can do your other broken druid stuff. I am skeptical though. Next we have a warrior spell, Provoke. 0 mana, Tradeable, choose a friendly minion, enemy minions attack it. So Tradeable, always nice. And the effect on this card is just pretty good too. So you play a big minion, and then you force all your opponent's minions to run into it, and it's a bit of a board clear in that regard. I think something that'll be really common with this is you play Crash on turn 5 or 6, and then provoke your opponent's aggro board. They all run into Crash, you clear their board, and you gain 8 armor. That's like a bit of a game-winning play against aggro decks. This also tends to be pretty good with, say, Rattlegore, just a big pile of stats that you can force your opponents to run all their stuff into. It does force you to have a minion to be a successful board clear, which is maybe a bit awkward, but I think that's pretty much, like, almost entirely offset by the fact that this card has Tradeable on it. So if you don't have a big minion to clear the board with, then you just throw this back in your deck and try to draw into, you know, Blade Storm or whatever is relevant. It might just be the case that it's a little bit difficult to find a deck slot for this in Control Warrior, but I think it's a pretty solid board clear. It's going to depend a lot on how your other board clears line up in the meta, but it's definitely a card that could see a lot of play. Next we have First Blade of Wrynn, a Paladin minion. 4 mana 3/5 with Divine Shield, and Battlecry, gain Rush if this has at least 4 attack. So you need to buff this somehow for it to have Rush. I think just as a 4 mana 3/5 Divine Shield, it looks pretty underwhelming compared to like Goody 2 Shields, which is 1 less mana and just has a better stat distribution for a Divine Shield minion. So you do need to be buffing this card for it to be relevant, I think. You can buff it with like Hand of a Doll or Conviction or something like that, but I think you're mostly going to want to be hand buffing this in some way. There is the new Paladin weapon, Prismatic Jewel Kit, which is 1 mana 0/3 after a friendly minion loses Divine Shield. Give minions in your hand +1/+1 and lose durability. So this is obviously a Divine Shield minion that wants to be buffed. It seems like it definitely just slots into the Prismatic Jewel Kit deck. And you can also buff this with Overlord Runthak, the 5 mana 3/6 that buffs your hand when it attacks. But that's not very consistent. That's like 3 cards that can buff this, and if it's not buffed, it seems like it's just kind of bad. This card is also going to be competing with Kazakus, a card that Paladin really likes using at the moment. So, I don't know, I think it's a little bit underwhelming. It's just like, we've seen a lot of cards in the past that are good if they're buffed, and they're always bad because they're bad if they're not buffed. And they're just not buffed more often than they are buffed. So I'm not too excited about this card currently. Next we have Remote Controlled Golem for Warrior. This is a 4 mana 3/6 mech. After this takes damage, shuffle 2 Golem parts into your deck. When drawn, summon a 2/1 mech. So this card just seems like really awkward and underwhelming to me. You shuffle 2/1s into your deck, and when you draw them, you summon a 2/1, but like, you're not playing this until turn 4, and then you're probably not drawing the 2/1 until like, even if you draw it on turn 5, like, having a 2/1 on turn 5, it just dies to everything. It's not that useful. It's not like the 2/1 has Rush as far as I can tell. It doesn't have any sort of relevant keyword, so it's just like a little thing on the board that is probably going to die. And it does seem like the way to abuse this is with like some sort of whirlwind effects or something. But if you're playing a bunch of whirlwind effects in your deck, then you don't really want 2/1s that are showing up on your board at the beginning of the turn. Particularly if your opponent has a big scary board and you top deck a 2/1 and you wanted to clear with Blade Storm, then like suddenly you can't even do that anymore. But maybe you just play this in a more tempo-oriented deck. You don't worry too much about proccing the effect on it. You just play it as a 4-drop. But then, like, the 2/1s still aren't that relevant. You probably aren't playing an insane amount of card draw to find them consistently. I mean, I guess this is pretty good with Provoke, maybe, but really only against like a Face Hunter board that has a bunch of 1/1s. I don't know. I just don't really like this card at all. I don't know where I would want to play it. I don't think the payoff is that good. I think it's kind of hard to even get like mini golems shuffled into your deck. I just don't get it. Warrior does have like a couple of mech synergies with Watley and the hand buff weapon, but I don't see this card being that useful.